Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are.
I understand Ma as like someone who came in without karma, like without attachment. And I understand her sort of like as somebody who was led by KL and spontaneity. And I wonder about this notion of without likes or dislikes.
Well, that's actually really not a very good translation, I have to say. The whole thing about no likes and no dislikes is something that's been kind of wrongly assimilated to mean bland. Like that you're going to run around kind of like not having any reactions to anything, neither liking nor disliking. Somebody once announced to me very proudly, this person I knew from India, I have no likes and no dislikes. And I didn't say anything, but I was thinking, you really like to be thought of a person with no likes and dislikes. You're very attached to that identity. That basically means that you are not attached to things being a certain way. It doesn't mean that you're not enjoying things. It doesn't mean that you don't say ouch when you stub your toe. It doesn't mean that you can't have responses to things, all different kinds of responses to things. It just means that you're not attached to being a particular way or having things be a particular way. And so it's equanimity in the face of your own changing circumstances even. Again, this is very interesting because people will try to embody some conceptual notion of equanimity or of not having likes or dislikes or experiencing the equality of everything, ekarasa. They'll try to embody that conceptually, and it will always end up looking like somebody who was Botoxed. I mean, this is just not what it's about, right?
I know you talk a lot about wholesomeness. Somehow there's a connection to it with wholesomeness in my mind, or I've been connecting it there.
Well, in the sense that, not in an ordinary way, no, but in the sense that that sense of wholesomeness or sweetness or goodness, when it is that recognition of how the natural state is, how everything is filled with that sweetness, that wholesomeness, that beneficence, that's the origin of actual equanimity. So, for instance, if I actually have a real embodied perception of the fundamental sweetness of everything, the fundamental sweet taste of everything, then even if I have karmas, I'm going to experience that sweet taste in those karmas. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be rejecting any particular way that anybody's showing up or rejecting having reactions to things. I mean, Ma smelled flowers and enjoyed the smell of the flowers. She didn't say, oh, flowers and dog shit, all the same. I mean, she wasn't running around pontificating like this. So it means however anything is, including yourself, that you are not attached to it being a different way. And this is a very high level of realization, actually, a lot more difficult than just suppressing your normal reactions to things. Because it means that you also experience all emotions as being equal in a sense, so that you're not afraid of grief or fear or pain or things going wrong. You just take those in stride because you have some sense, at least, that everything is the expression of this one reality, and there's no reason to feel like anything is wrong about yourself or other people either. At the same time, you can feel free to respond to things as you wish, as just naturally arises. So for instance, Ma, it's a famous story about her. It was in some ashram, I don't remember which one, but they had just laid a sidewalk. So they had just poured cement to lay a new sidewalk somewhere in the ashram grounds. And Ma said, you have to dig that sidewalk up. There's a plant underneath it that's crying out for help. So they did. And there was like this little pepper plant under there that they rescued. But she didn't rescue all plants, and she ate plants. So it was like a spontaneous expression in that moment of rescuing that plant. Now, if you were in fake no likes or dislike modes, you would be like, all plants are the same, living or dying. I don't have to do anything. Let the plant die. Whatever, Or you might be standing on the sidelines saying, oh, I don't think Ma's very realized. I mean, why would she react this way to a dying plant? I mean, that's not very realized, right? She has a preference for this plant not dying. There could be that kind of criticism happening. But what she was doing was just being spontaneous and recognizing that everything is an aspect of that oneself. So it's fine to rescue one plant and eat a different plant. And as a matter of fact, Ma said, contradictions only exist at a certain level of experience. Once you have a bigger perception of reality, everything is included. All contradictions are not resolved, they are just all included. So she could tell one group of people they had to be strict vegetarians, and she could go and eat fish. She could tell one group of people they had to observe the most strict cleanliness laws, but then she would drink out of dirty puddles. Are these contradictions? No, it's just everything is included. Anything that could possibly be. And as Ma said, God makes the impossible possible and also the possible impossible. So everything's included in the life of those who are more realized. They can enjoy everything and experience everything and not reject anything. In fact, there's a famous teaching that I've heard from numerous teachers, but also from Ma. And I don't remember how she put it exactly, but something like, in the end, there's nothing to renounce. There's no need to renounce anything. Or if you want to renounce, that's fine too. At that point, when you're just experiencing the wisdom of everything and the essential nature of everything, then any way of feeling is fine. Any way of behaving is fine. It will all be expressive of that fundamental goodness or wholesomeness or sweetness. Wholesomeness is a word that I use sometimes to try to describe that feeling when you're trying to decide what to do or what not to do. And then there's like a feeling of one direction is more wholesome than the other. It's more in keeping with your own inner sense of value or sweetness. And it has a wholesome feel, like the best quality milk.
I have a question. Okay, for like the last year and a half or 2 years, I feel like I keep trying to do things and then they blow up in my face over and over. And I don't know if it's just like a weird period or I'm doing something that is causing this.
Well, we can go two routes with that. One is you probably are in a period where that's just more likely to happen. We do go through bigger periods in our lives. In Jyotish, they're called dasha periods, and some of them are many, many years long. But they also have sub-periods and different textures. They're not just all one thing. And it might be really useful for you to get an astrology reading and find out what period you're in and what's impacting you. And, when we're in a period where we have those kinds of so-called difficulties, then if we know in advance, this is the beauty of Jyotish, if we know in advance, we might not be able to totally mitigate it, but at least we can step over some of the things we might have tripped on. So I would recommend getting a reading for sure. The other thing is that in Jyotish, there's a lot of, in sort of conventional Jyotish or other kinds of astrology, not just Jyotish, there's, I think, a overemphasis on avoiding difficulties or avoiding things falling apart. When things go completely sideways, there's also opportunity to experience a certain kind of openness and groundlessness, or even like hilarity. There's something, at some point, if things keep going awry, there's a certain degree of hilarity about it, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, on one level, for a practitioner, those kinds of experiences aren't necessarily unhelpful. They're not necessarily obstacles. But we can still pay more attention to the times and what we're influenced by, and use the tools that we have to be more skillful in navigating those things.
I've been thinking recently about like the urge to confess. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Well, that's a very layered question, because to use the word confession kind of front loads it with a lot of baggage. But if we just talk about speaking something that needs to be spoken, you could call that confession, but not necessarily. Maybe it's just something that needs to be spoken, because secrets can be very burdensome. That's not true in all cases, but sometimes it is. Confession, I don't know that it can really be pulled from its Christian context, because the point of confession is to be forgiven. The point of confession is to receive skillful means to mitigate sins. Right? It's like very, very bound up in that discourse. But just speaking is different. Like sometimes we just speak because we want to be relieved of some sense that it's not okay to have the truth that we have. That's different than being forgiven, per se, in a Christian sense. So I don't know if I can really separate out that word confession. But in any case, the idea that we would do things that are sinful and then confess to them and then receive some sort of forgiveness for them and then start the whole thing all over again is completely antithetical to this tradition. Because there's no concept of sin. And it ties back to what we were just talking about, which is that there's only goodness here. Even though it doesn't look like it on the surface, when you have an experience of that primordial reality, you have a direct experience of the beneficence of the goodness and wisdom of everything. So there's no possibility that there's anything wrong or anything sinful. That being said, on a relative level, we all have our troubles. On a relative level, certain things don't feel good and are troublesome to us. And there's different ways of handling that. But certainly, sometimes telling someone what's going on for us, or what we've done or not done, is helpful, it's relieving. Other times it's not. But if you feel guilty, it doesn't matter what the view is. We have to deal with how we actually feel. We can't just say, well, the view says I shouldn't feel like a sinner, I shouldn't feel guilty. But you actually do, so what are you going to do about that? Over time, maybe a little bit more view will seep in and you'll feel better about yourself, despite whatever's happening. And also, maybe you'll have more contact with that reality that will show you what your real nature is. But you certainly will not get there in any state of fantasy. I've just been thinking about this a lot lately. Now I'm diverting from your topic, but because I've just been struck during the last 15 or so months by people who are really putting a lot of time into spiritual practice, and maybe even their whole lives are centered on it. And yet they don't want to know, they don't want to see what is really happening in this country and what we're really doing to other people, and people here and people elsewhere. They just don't want to see the reality of it. And when we are practitioners, we have to be willing to see everything with clarity. We have to be willing to be in our real condition, not in the condition we wish we were in. We're not living through the lies that we've been told about ourselves and other people. We have to really want to get down to the nitty-gritty of what is actually happening, to have clarity about things, because that's the only basis for spiritual practice. The only basis for practice is how we actually are. You can't practice with a fantasy or a lie or a story that's not true. So for instance, if you feel guilty and ashamed of something, but you hear that the view says there's no sin, and you try to just talk yourself out of feeling how you actually feel, then you've lost the basis for your practice around that. You have to be just being a little friendlier toward how you actually are, and also being a lot more determined to put up with reality as it is. So fantasy is the death knell of spiritual life. And I've just been struck in the last 15 months, particularly with other spiritual teachers who just don't want to know. They just don't want to see, they don't want to learn, they don't want to know. And there's actually no basis for realization if that is your approach. So think about that. We have to be willing to put up with what is in ourselves and others and our world. Because that is the material that we actually have to work with. That is our actual ground. And it's not all bad either. It's not like in saying that we have to put up with reality as it actually is, that it's all bad. It's like we have to be willing also to enjoy the things that we're enjoying. We have to be with our suffering and enjoy the things that we're enjoying. And try to be as clear-sighted as we can, and don't shy away from finding things out. Don't just push things away, because then we have no basis. I have said this so many times, but I just am very optimistic, or I was anyway, but overweeningly optimistic, maybe unreally optimistic around certain things. And definitely the last 5 years or so have stripped me on many, many, many levels, not just because of what's happening in the world, of a lot of the unreal optimism that I had. And it's painful, but I'm a better teacher now. And I'm a better practitioner. And I'm just a better being with other peopler. So it wasn't really fun, because optimism is somewhat of a drug. And of course, we come in with lots of different stories about things, and then we learn more. So it's not like this is anybody's fault, but I'm just saying that given the opportunity to come into more clarity about anything, as spiritual practitioners, we should grab it. Satsang with Shambhavi is produced by Jayakula, a nonprofit community offering opportunities to learn and practice in the direct realization traditions of Trika Shaivism and Dzogchen. If you enjoyed listening, please help us keep this podcast and many other teachings open to all by making a monthly or one-time donation. Visit jayakula.org to make a donation and explore more of our offerings.